Hello. Welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. I'm your host, Veronica Andrews, and I brought you a book today that I can say I brought you because I asked that they come. I saw them on Chronicle. Maybe you did as well. So Close to Home. My guest is Alison O'Leary, who wrote it in conjunction with Michael Togas.
Yes.
Hey. And fascinating. I don't think there's enough words, and I don't think we can fit it in a half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you go to write a true story in a historical narrative such as this, do you have to interview the family? Do you have to ask their permission?
Well, we were fortunate that a family member, a survivor of this incident in World War II, came to us.
Oh, excellent.
Mike, my co-author, is well known as a sea rescue author, and this book has a great sea rescue sequence in it because a German submarine torpedoes the ship that this American family was on in a very unknown incident of World War II.
In the Gulf of Mexico.
In the Gulf of Mexico.
Who knew?
Right.
And I think it's important that we realize they're not a military family.
Right.
They were employed by a private fruit company, and they were coming from their overseas assignment, and they were getting uncomfortable, and they booked passage on the freighter, and it was comfortable, and they were enjoying it as much as the crew was enjoying them. As the encroachment of the war came closer and closer, he actually tried to get the family off the ship.
Yes.
But because of something he signed, and this is where you should read everything he signed, it said the minute you get on, you don't get off until you're home.
More or less. They did divert to Corpus Christi, Texas, instead of the port that they were destined for, which was New Orleans. They saw something in the Gulf of Mexico, became very concerned about it, thought it might be a submarine. It probably was a submarine. They went to Corpus Christi and requested to get off the ship, and they were denied. So they were sent on their way. They were told, you're so close to home, you only have one more day's passage to make before you're at your destination of New Orleans. But it was there 2 o'clock in the morning outside of New Orleans that they were torpedoed.
And it's going to be awful to be hit by a torpedo. It's even worse when you don't even expect it.
They were never expected.
No, and a little girl, a boy, an older boy had already been sent home earlier.
Yes, he had, yes.
And the mother and the father. And when it hit, they all went in different directions.
They were together initially, running for their lifeboat station as they had been trained to do, as most ship's passengers were trained to do at that point in time. And when they reached the top of a staircase, a wall of water hit them. They had been holding hands, and they were all torn apart. As a parent, it gives me chills every time I think of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's the middle of the night, you're in a strange place, you're far from land, and suddenly you have no idea if your children or your spouse has survived and how to get back together again.
And still, survival, you have to survive yourself. But you're wondering where they are, and you're cold, and you're wet, and you don't have a lot of clothing on, nightgowns, pajamas.
Right.
It had to be awful, awful, awful. And I remember the passage where the father and the son finally are reunited, thank God, and they're headed for a lifeboat with the captain, and the captain insists that he gets in the boat first because he can't swim.
Yes.
Wouldn't one think that that was mandatory to be the captain?
No,
of a
actually,
ship?
it's not uncommon, or it wasn't uncommon at that time for sailors to not know how to swim.
I wouldn't even get on a ship if I couldn't swim.
I guess they were relying on the life rafts.
After Titanic, I still wouldn't get on it. Horrendous. And now the mother was totally alone,
Yes.
covered with oil, and of course the oil was burning on the top of the water. Unimaginable hell. And she's on, was it 2 pieces of wood? It wasn't even a raft that she grabbed a hold of.
Right.
and some of the sailors were assisting her and holding on to the raft, and any mother would love this kid, but you could kill him too. He was in the shower when the torpedo hit, so he's bollocky bare ass naked.
That's a nice way to put it.
In the water, which had to be cold, and she tries to encourage him to come on the raft with her, and he couldn't be naked in front of a lady. God bless him. And he eventually let go and was gone.
Well, we don't know for sure about that.
Oh, good.
What
I'd like
happened
to think he's still alive.
And I can quote directly from the mother who was just with her life jacket. She said, "Son, this is no time for modesty. Get up on that board." And he refused. So she said, "I'm leaving so that you can get up on that board." And she swam away on her own, again, to hopefully survive totally by herself in the ocean.
With one eye completely
With one eye,
encumbered.
Yes, yes. And left those sailors where you would think that if there were a group of them, they'd be easier to spot for a rescue. But she took that chance because she didn't want to be responsible for that young man's death out of modesty.
On modesty. Well, let's hope that he did. I wonder over time, did they ever hear from other people that had survived? Was there ever any contact beyond, that the country was happy for them, they were celebrated, but the actual people that were on board ship with them, did they hear from them?
That's a good question. They did stay in touch with one local family. They were actually from Linfield. The gentleman who rescued 11-year-old Lucille Downs from the shipwreck, his name was Roy Sorley Sr., and he was from Linfield, Mass. He was a Norwegian immigrant and sailor, second mate on the ship. And after he rescued Lucille, the Downs family, her parents, were just eternally grateful and stayed in touch with Roy Sorley and his wife for the rest of their lives.
And I don't know if he had children of his own, but he took care of her as if she was his own child.
Yes. And he was awarded the Merchant Marine Meritorious Service Medal for his heroism. Can I tell a quick story?
Please,
Very interesting. I love to tell the story about our research. I was researching this particular part of the book, was trying to find out more about the Merchant Marine Meritorious Service Medal, and I found Roy Sorley Jr. living in Linfield. And I love to tell this story because I do public speaking events on this book topic, and I show pictures of the ship and of the people involved, and even of the Germans involved in their submarines, so that we have alternating points of view in the book. And when I went to research this particular aspect of heroism, I found Roy Sorley Jr. living in Linfield, and I thought, they've got to be connected. There's got to be a relationship here. So I called him up and I said, "I'm writing a book that involves your father." And he said, "Oh, great, I can't wait to find out what he did." And I said, "Wait, you're supposed to tell me what he did."
That so often happens.
And he said, "My dad never talked about it." He said, "I know a little bit from my mother, but my dad never talked about it. I know about the medal. The medal hung in our house for my whole life. But unfortunately, his father, didn't think much of it, didn't spend much time talking about himself."
Most of the time they're embarrassed. They don't want fuss over. That was their job.
Right.
That's what they were supposed to do.
Exactly.
When you meet a burly war hero that's telling guts and glory, he probably didn't get out of the mud hole. And the quiet ones, the gentlemanly ones, the ones that remove their hats, those are the ones that saw the most service. We just decorated graves in my community for Memorial Day. And to me, it's more meaningful than going to the parade, because they pull in and they slowly get out of their cars with their cane or their crutcher. They have a hat or a jacket on that says, where they were. And they walk that cemetery and they make sure that every grave has a flag on it. And they never forget.
Very true. Very true.
And those are the ones that saw the most service, lived on with a disability. really remember the friends that they didn't come home with.
Yes. We were so pleased when we wrote the book to find that we were actually giving some notice about the merchant mariners who served during the war. They were not acknowledged as a branch of the military at all, but they had one of the highest relative casualty rates due to the German submarines coming to the United States. The German submarines sunk over 170 ships on the East Coast and in the Caribbean just in the first 4 months of 1942.
And I didn't learn that in high school.
No,
When
few of us do.
When I first came here, I think we did 3 Coast Guard books, and it astounded me how much the Merchant Marine eventually alluded into the Coast Guard took care of the Eastern Seaboard. If somebody had asked me 20 years ago if we had submarines along, I'd say, not,
Yes.
big time. And yet it still took me off guard that they were in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes. Well, nobody believed that they had that kind of range, that they could go that far.
In Dogma, the captain of the German boat and another captain, they sort of were in a race to see who could do the most damage.
Yes. They did a lot of damage.
Oh, did they ever?
But we thought it was very important, though, to show their point of view and what their sailors went through, because we believe, and we know from firsthand experience, that when it's wartime, young men have no choice but to serve their countries. In Germany, the same as in the United States. They were drafted, and the Germans were lucky if they got service in the submarines, because for the beginning of 1942, they were doing great. They went home every couple of months and got to eat well and shower and all that sort of thing that they couldn't do on the submarines. But later in 1943, the U.S. and the Allies had turned the tide against the German submarines and really started to sink them right and left. And by the end of the war, the German submariners, only had a 1 in 4 chance of surviving the war.
And that's surviving a humid, sweaty interior with no bath or shower facilities, no fresh food, rations if they were lucky, and a certain amount of water. So you tell me, which is the better, death or be 3 months on a submarine and you're unable to surface?
Yeah.
Not a choice I would like to have had.
But we really liked alternating the chapters to give that point of view, and then, as you probably read the Laconia chapter, it becomes very difficult when you sort of feel like you know these people a little bit to paint them as all evil and the Americans or the Allies as all good. It was wartime.
I found the difference in humanity, both on the Germans' part, take care of those that abandon the ship, make sure they're in the lifeboats, give them supplies and blankets, and the guy who lined them up on the deck and shot them all. There didn't seem to be a middle ground. You either acted like a rational human being or a crazy person.
Yeah.
And it was almost the luck of the draw, whichever ship you were on, whoever shot you down.
Well, the Japanese were more likely to
Be
harm any survivors of shipwrecks. The Germans, there were no documented cases.
Thank you, God, for that. Well, it can't be easy to be a German descendant.
Right.
And,
we meet quite a lot of them when we're out speaking about the book.
And they appreciate telling the truth.
Their family members had to serve their country. But, it's helpful to know that some of the German submariners and even the commanders of the submarines did come to the United States in the 1980s and 1990s when they were quite elderly, and they shook hands with the sailors who they had shipwrecked during the war. So these men knew that during wartime you act one way, and during peacetime you put those differences aside.
And then back to the family, when they finally were reunited, thank you, God, and they were together, and they continued to reestablish their lives, and you followed their lives through. I was surprised that their marriages didn't hold up.
Well, the parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But did the children marry happily, or did they not also have?
I've got to think about that.
I'm pretty sure they.
Ray,
Yeah.
the son Sonny, who we follow in the book, he had a very happy long marriage.
Good.
Yeah.
Because tragedy usually binds you, and you hold on because you know how horrible can be.
Right.
So when you get happy and joyful, you hold on to it and treasure it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say is that it takes a lot of stubbornness to survive at sea. You can't give up. And both Ina, the wife, and Ray, the father, the husband, were both very, very stubborn people, and that may not make for a happy marriage. Just a little insight from somebody who's been there.
Yeah, true. So if they hadn't been thrown in the water by a torpedo, they might not have lasted 10 years.
Who knows? Who knows?
But they did. And it's a good thing. The good thing they were a close family, and they almost could read one another's minds. I didn't hear in the narrative that they gave up. They were hurt, they were in trouble, but they were always positive that they were going to, didn't know how, find the rest of the family. And that's a faith and a belief that can carry you over a lot of waves.
That's very true. That's very true.
And the nasty German captain, he drowned.
He did.
He did. He let go.
Well, he was successfully bombed by an American B-24. And we have the actual photograph of his U-boat being bombed by the B-24 on the 12th of July, 1943. It was such a lucky break. We found it in the National Archives. And it's written right across the bottom of the photo, the name of the captain who was flying the B-24, what his squadron was, where he was, the coordinates, and it was the Bay of Biscay where a lot of German submarines went to the bottom.
And I think it was in the last chapter, you mentioned the oil slick in the Gulf of Mexico in 1992.
Yes, yeah.
And again, with the Valdez and all those, everybody was going after from this end the oil came. And you really believed that it was the
yes.
freight ship.
Right.
That finally had its barrels and its tanks had let go, and the oil came up from below, which is totally plausible.
Yes, yeah, they traced it back to the Heredia, the ship that the family was on.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? It comes back and reminds them.
Karma is a witch.
Yeah.
You enjoyed this and you learned a lot. Where will you go from here? Are you going to go for another sea trial?
Well, we're willing to investigate any opportunities. I have recently published our second hiking book. This is an Appalachian Mountain Club book, Best Day Hikes Near Boston. That just came out this year. We have another New England travel book called Inns and Adventures, which is New Hampshire, Vermont, and the Berkshires that Mike and I collaborated on. And now I'm looking at another history book.
Which one?
I am not allowed to say.
Oh, dear.
It's with our agent in New York. And he's looking for a home for it.
New England based, United States?
It's United States. It covers New England.
Okay.
A significant historical event in New England and a dozen other states.
Well, I can't get over it, and I love history, and I love doing them and doing so many. I find an answer to a question that came up in this book. I find it in this book. It was just recently redoing our public library in my own community, and we were able to purchase a lot of duplicate documents when they emptied it out for the renovation. And for years I've been trying to figure out where George Washington stayed in Woburn, Massachusetts.
Oh, how interesting.
And here it was.
Yeah.
An entry in someone's diary.
Wow.
And the other one was Adams and Hancock were on Lexington Common the night before the battle.
Oh.
But they were known to hide in Woburn because if they were captured, that would be the pièce de résistance. But I couldn't find out where they stayed. And here it was.
Wow.
In this, and I not only do I love it, but I'm terrified for the children who aren't learning cursive.
Oh,
When they get to be
they won't
our
be able to
age,
decipher
how are they going to
history.
be able to research?
That's
Really
true.
true. My grandchildren hand me their birthday cards now and say, Nana, who signed this? I can't read it. And, you know, I love history and then finding these gems. And I want the same for them. Now we're already having too much fun, and we're going to stop and let you read us a passage so everybody knows how good the book is. Be right back.
I'm going to read a brief passage from So Close to Home about the mother's survival story after the ship Heredia was torpedoed by a German submarine in the Gulf of Mexico in 1942. Her name is Ina. Ina's survival story was one fueled by luck, determination, and pure stubbornness. When the Downs family was escaping from the lower deck of the Heredia and climbing the mahogany stairs, the ship lurched and rushing water tore Lucille from her grip. Ina heard Lucille scream, "Mother, where are you?" Then the young mother found herself underwater, tumbling in the churning water, more terrified than she had ever been in her life. An eddy pinned her against a wall beneath a ladder to an upper deck. As the swirling black water rose, she felt helpless. She was trapped, unable to move, and unsure where her husband and children were. Then in a split second, the eddy shifted and pushed her upward, and she was able to grab a window and perch on the sill looking out toward the sea as the ship groaned and convulsed beneath her. She looked around for her family, but saw no one. Self-preservation instinctively kicked in, and she heard a voice say to her, "Jump, or you'll go down with the ship." She pushed away from the ship with her stomach in her throat, flying through the blackness of night and water and uncertainty.
Oh my God. But you did a great job in making it feel like it was you. You were on that boat. Yeah. You were feeling that terror. It was totally sucked you in and made it a first person. I don't think you could have done as well on a television show if you had the family doing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I love the point about the boy when in high school was asked to write an essay about how the war affected him. And he wrote his family's story. And the teacher gave him an F. Because,
true story.
Yep, yeah. Because it was supposed to be a true story. And for all the teachers out there that are wonderful and encourage young people, there are those who should have said, why do you expect me to believe that's a true story? You know, you don't put the kid down. You don't slam him right there. Even if it was all in his imagination, it was good work. And you should have had enough depth of education to know that there was a basis of reality there. So thank you I applaud his A for doing the essay, and I applaud you for doing the book, and I'm sure it's successful. We're hearing about it everywhere.
Wonderful.
So close to home. Who knew? Who wanted to know? But I learned more in this book than I learned in my high school history class. And that makes me mad. But I probably wouldn't have paid attention then.
True, very true.
So thank you for extending my education into my elder years.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. The book is so close to home, and it really was close to home. My guest has been Alison O'Leary. Catch you next time on Off the Shelf, Books on Tour. Bye.